Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thank you for last week and accommodating your schedule with ours, but we will not disappoint. We have a couple of things going on, but the first thing is that I wanted to let you know that we have scheduled the next week, so it's same time next week, Thursday, here at 9 a.m. So that's the second part of the applicants workshop. And then on the 28th, the following Thursday, we will have our bidders conference regarding this application. But by the end of the morning on the 21st, you will have gotten this down. So I just also am very mindful and kind of don't like it, but it's recorded. And so you are able to access parts of this workshop if you are not a good note taker or you're just enthralled and you're just listening. So that's even better. But more importantly, I would like to introduce our state senator, Josh Newman, who is here. And he is coming down to the podium. Almost no introduction needed.
Sounds like you were worried for a second. I wasn't. So can I take this out? So it is so nice to see everybody here. So happy fall. It's nice to see people in person. Couldn't be more excited about at some point getting this pandemic behind us. Proud to have secured next year's funding in the budget. So, and I will apologize. It came a little closer to the wire than I'd ever hoped. And so we're looking at, and also equally pleased to see we're expanding the task force from 10 to 13 cities to the whole of the North Orange County SPA. So that is progress. I'm also quite excited. Sue and I have been talking. We're working directly with the governor's office to bring Governor Newsom down to learn more about this program. And so they are not only aware but very intrigued and encouraged at the model we've created and its potential for replication across the state. So Sue and I will be working on that over the next couple of weeks, and we'll keep you posted. Looking forward, well, first, thank you. Thank you to everybody here. Thank you to every single organization here who has participated over the last 4 years and is making a very real difference, not only in your communities, but in the region. So please give yourselves a round of applause. And then my top priority for next year, obviously, is to not leave you all in suspense for the next budget year. And so we're looking to secure a multiple year allocation for funding, which will make it, I think, a lot easier. So thanks to Sue Kang, thanks to Chief Sinus, who I do not see here, but who's provided such wonderful leadership. And thank you to Tim Shaw for everything that you've done and will continue to do in encouraging the growth and development of all these organizations. I am proud of securing the funding, and that is what I've done. I'm also very proud to have been part of those early conversations that shaped this concept. But I don't do much more beyond that. It's you folks who do the work, and it's you folks who are doing, I think, the very important work of ideating on your own programs and figuring out how better to align your work with others. And for that, I'm not only grateful, but very excited. Sue and Corey and I have been speaking. The one thing that I would urge you to think about as you move forward in the work this year and in following years is how we measure success. How we quantify the good work that we know we're all doing. And it's sometimes hard to put your finger on it. It does take deliberate thought at the outset. So we do this work in ways that we can quantify not only the benefits but also the savings. And we all know intuitively those are real, but we need at the end of each cycle to be able to articulate those things and do that clearly. It will not only help me in securing additional funding in following years, I think it will help everybody in really attacking the panoply of problems that lead to homelessness, to youth violence, and to post-incarceration reentry challenges. And those are all very important things that relate to quality of life in our area. And so one of the most encouraging things to me is that I am continually stopped in all of the cities that I represent and thanked for, and I'm always a little sheepish about it, for the good work that you people are doing. So thank you for making me look good. But the message really is that your work is known, and that the difference you're making is real and it's clear. Christine, I was at, again, sort of pleasantly surprised but a little embarrassed. I was at the Brea Olinda Unified School District State of the Schools, and Project Kinship. Is there somebody from Project Kinship here? Of course. Could not have been more undeserving of all the praise I got, right? Because you folks are doing the work. But this collaborative has provided funding. This collaborative has provided a framework for doing that work. And that is happening in all of the other cities in the district. And for that, you should all be very proud. And lastly, we should all be very grateful to Sue Kang, without whom none of this would have ever happened, without whom none of this would be possible now. So thank you, Sue, and thank you, everybody, and I look forward to participating in today's workshop. Lastly, and sadly, I think, and I'll try to do this without getting emotional, I think many of you knew my Chief of Staff, Mark Hansen, who passed away completely, surprisingly, still no known cause, on August 26th of heart failure. Mark was the most dedicated, most generous public servant I have ever known. I think most of you have met him at some point. And so we are having a local memorial, a celebration of Mark's life on Saturday, this coming Saturday at 5 p.m. at Hillcrest Park. If you can make it, please be there. But thank you to everybody who's been so kind, not just to me, but to Mark's family in his passing, and he leaves a huge void. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. How are ya? Good? Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to go? All right, so jumping off thank you, first of all, Senator Newman, thank you so much. I think we all appreciate what you've done, and as you look out here, it's amazing to look out and see everybody here, right? And all the collaboratives that have been formed, all the capacity that's been built, all the people who've been helped. It's pretty amazing. So I too want to thank you all for really committing to some of the processes that we establish here. When the former task force, now the collaborative, was formed, if you all recall, we set out not just to achieve some programmatic outcomes. We didn't just want to see we wanted to see obviously reductions in homelessness and in youth violence. We wanted to see better services for people who are coming out of incarceration. But we wanted to ensure that at the end of this, we could say that these dollars were leveraged to increase and improve the capacity of the region to address all of these issues, right? So we kind of put parallel processes into place, right? So one of those processes was funding programs, right? And funding all of you to do the great work, to think differently about that work, to think creatively, to think collaboratively, to develop new programs, to test things out. But the other thing we did was we developed a capacity building track where we did a series of workshops at the beginning where we went over a variety of things. We did everything from, I was just talking about, branding and marketing. We brought Ryan Rikas, a marketing and branding expert here. That was the most highly rated of all of the workshops that we did. Nonprofits never get access to that kind of a free, service, that type of free advice and mentoring. And so we did them on strategic visioning, on collaboration, on project management and personal time and task management, on grant winning and developing your revenue model, impact evaluation, outcomes measurement, all of those types of things. And then we followed that up with some peer learning groups where we went deeper into those things. We got smaller groups together around board strengthening, board development, strategic planning, strategic visioning, those types of things. We brought Art Taylor from Give.org out. This was one of the worst impacts on the collaborative from the pandemic. Was we had a wonderful collaborations symposium at the Richard Nixon Library, all planned, completely ready to go in April of the year that the pandemic hit. And so we had to regroup, but we got Art out to do a webinar, and he was fantastic. I hope that you all took a lot of that to heart, because we're going to talk about how now we're leveraging that capacity building work into the actual request for proposal process, Okay, so it's one thing to do all that kind of work, right? But it's another thing to actually literally put our money where our mouth is and want you to reflect that work back to us in terms of what we're funding in this next round and what we're going to fund going forward. But to Sue's point, when we talked about how do we do that in a way that's not a shock to the system, that doesn't create a whole bunch of extra work for you all, well, we're going to try and make it easy for you. We decided instead of doing one bidders conference where we just go over, here's how to fill out the application, that what we would do is do a couple of bidders workshops where we literally gave you the language we would like to see and told you how to be successful with your proposal. So that's what this is today. So we originally were going to do that in 3 bidders workshops, but as we were talking about a little bit more, we thought we could combine these 2. So today I'm going to discuss collaboration, and I'm going to do a little refresher on the workshop that we did and some of the ideas that you heard from Art Taylor on that. The purpose for that is, again, we want to give you the language. So remember I've told you in previous workshops, no need to vociferously take notes, all that kind of stuff. I would encourage you to take notes today. Like, write down some of the language that you're hearing today, because that language we would like to see reflected back in the proposals. We want you to embody that in the work that you're doing. So the first part is on collaboration, and then I'm going to do another primer on strategic visioning, the adaptive planning, the community engaged strategic planning process that we taught you in one of the workshops and that some of you have participated in. So this is stuff we want to see reflected back. But what I want to say on the outset is this, and I want everybody to hear me on this, okay? We were adamant, Sue, myself, Laura, all of us talking about putting the RFP together. We were adamant that we were not going to make this a punitive process. What we mean by that is, as I'm going through this, if you're looking at this going, oh, we're not doing all that stuff right now, that's okay. That does not exclude you from funds. What we want to do is we want you to tell us the truth on the application, right? We're not very good at this, right? We're struggling with this. Here are the challenges we've had with strategic planning. Here's one of the reasons why we haven't really done it, right? And then guess what we're going to do? We're going to give you the opportunity to ask us for help. So we're going to look favorably on that. So instead of some application process where you feel the need to try and dress yourself up and we're okay with the flaws. We're okay with some of the deficiencies. We'd rather know what they are so that we can help you all address them, okay? So let us know in the application. I want everybody to understand that from the outset. Let us know in the application what you're struggling with in these areas where we're asking you to start getting better as organizations and as collaboratives, and we'll help you with those. So let's jump in. I'm going to start here with collaboration. We're going to talk about collaboration. So our objectives here, we're going to review the possible types of collective action, and I'm going to go through this part really quickly. I forgot to mention, these are all the original workshops that are on the website, along with sample forms, sample documents, all kinds of resources for you. But I want to go through this just to kind of highlight the stuff that we think is important. So I'm not doing a deep dive. You can watch all of those workshops on your own. We're going to refresh on the principles of effective collective action. We're going to talk about drafting and executing collaborative agreements, something very important for the RFP process for those of you submitting as collaboratives. And we're going to learn to incorporate collaboration into your proposal. So I'm going to tell you kind of what we're looking for. So let's start here. Let's chat about collective impact, right? We hear that term a lot. It's kind of a little pet peeve of mine. I think we overuse collective impact. We use it for literally everything we do. If we go to one meeting where there are more than one organization, we've obviously engaged in a collective impact model together, right? So this is the best definition of collective impact I've ever heard. It comes from John Kania and Mark Kramer from the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And I'm going to break it down for you because it's important. This is the kind of stuff we're looking to seed in this round of the RFP. So the definition of collective impact, a joint effort with a centralized infrastructure. That means it's intentional, right? This isn't something that's just a loose confederation or a loose coalition of folks who get together and chat about the work that they do once a month or something like that. A centralized infrastructure. There has been planning and intent that has gone into deciding how the work of that group of organizations, that collaborative, is going to get done. Dedicated staff. One of the big failures I've seen with collaboratives is that it is unclear who is staffing it from a leadership perspective, from a direct work perspective, from an administrative perspective, financial perspective, who's the lead organization, right? And who's responsible within the lead organization to do what? Who's responsible within the partner organizations to do what? So that there's dedicated staff to the work, to the intentional centralized infrastructure that the collaborative has developed. A structured process that leads to a common agenda, shared measurement, continuous communication, and mutually reinforcing activities among all participants. I want to stress a structured process, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. In my mind, it's truly not a collaborative unless you have a structured process and you've intentionally, collaboratively designed that structured process for decision making, for abandoning, adding, eliminating, reducing, changing, all of those types of things. The communication processes, feedback loops are all built in, and that these mutually reinforcing activities are clear among all the participants, okay? So I love this definition of a collective impact. It kind of touches everything. I'm just gonna whip through here in a second. So, let me go through this kind of quickly because I want to get to, these are all reasons why one might collaborate, but I'm going to skip over those because I want to focus on the main one that we want to see reflected in the RFP, and that is this. If you attended the workshop with Art Taylor, this is central to his philosophy around nonprofit collaboration. There's simply no reason to collaborate unless you're creating new value. And if you can't articulate what that new value is, then you're probably not creating new value, right? And so, as Senator Newman was just talking about, and what you're going to hear from Laura Giltrejo in the next bidders workshop, she's going to go over impact evaluation, your impact model, outcomes measurement, that kind of stuff. That creation of new value has to be measurable. Now, when you're a single organization doing this, that's a little easier to do than when you're a collaborative doing it, right? So you need to ensure that you have processes in place. And you might be a small collaborative, that makes it a little easier, but the more people you add, the more organizations you add to your collaborative, the more you have to be intentional about ensuring everybody is clear on the new value that this collaborative is creating. So you're going to see in a minute, we want you to reflect that back to us in the application. So in your proposal, we want to see a clear articulation of what the new value is that this collaborative is creating. So, not going to go over this for a long time, but I just want to point out, again, there's a continuum, there's a spectrum of collective action, right? That ranges from competition, there's something collective about that, right? Everybody goes after the same dollars, right? So you could be in a purely competitive environment all the way up to consolidation, mergers, right? We don't see a lot of mergers in the nonprofit space. Frankly, I wish we saw more mergers in the nonprofit space. I don't know if there's anybody out there thinking we need a ton more nonprofits. We probably need to be more efficient. It would be great to see some organizations merge, but that's not always possible. But along this continuum of cooperation, loose cooperation, coalition, a little more structure there. I ran the Orange County Homeless Issues Task Force back in the 90s. That was a coalition. There were members of the task force. Nobody signed a partnership agreement. Everybody just sort of shared some common values, common principles, and common mission. Then there's collaboration, cohabitation, actually moving in together, sharing space, and then consolidation mergers. Most of you are going to be parked in the collaboration space. That's really what we want to see here, are collaboratives that are seated. So some of the challenges that you're going to want to think about in putting your collaborative together, and then I'm going to talk about how to solve some of these. One is unrealistic or poorly developed expectations. These are planned disappointments, right? So you need to, as a collaborative, again, this is a little easier to do when you're a single organization. Where I see collaboratives fail is when they get sideways with each other in terms of what is ultimately expected from the work of the collaborative, but also ultimately what is expected from the members of the collaborative. I can name a name right now of a collaborative that I have worked with that is having this very problem. And they're a great group, right? But somehow, some way, along the way, they got sideways with each other about what the expectations were for each of the members of the collaborative. So it's very important that that is established and reinforced. Competition always hovers at the edge. The bottom line is we live in a world of finite resources. All of you are going into the same funding pools. Here's how I approach this. Acknowledge it. Collaboratives should acknowledge competition, right? But you should agree with your collaborative partners on where you're going to compete and where you're going to collaborate. Just be upfront about it. I've put together collaboratives where we've sat down and literally had that difficult conversation. All right, on this stuff here, we're going to collaborate, right? Outside of that, it's a free-for-all. Every person for himself. They can just go for it, right? But you need to have that conversation. This is an issue that I see sometimes with collaboratives too. You can end up in a little bit of a bubble to where you're only talking to each other. These next two are kind of related to this. Ignoring outside conditions that are impacting the work of the collaborative, because you get in, again, I can name names of a couple of collaboratives where I've seen this happen, where I've come in, they brought me in, and I kind of say, don't you all know what's happening out there? They're so used to just talking amongst themselves. They've created this sort of echo chamber and bubble. You need to ensure that the collaborative is not insulating you from the outside conditions or from the people that you're all serving. Also, don't jump into collaboratives willy-nilly, right? Sometimes it's okay to go it alone. It's maybe better to go it alone, and you should always have that as an out. Diffused leadership leads to confused followers, right? It is really hard to put a leadership structure together that's going to work, a decision-making structure that's going to work, that everybody understands. So it's crucial at the beginning of your collaborative that you discuss what that is going to be. Who is going to be in a leadership position? How are you all going to make decisions together? And then this is I see in collaboratives too. I've used this term before. Nonprofits are very good about dragging dead bodies around, right? You ask somebody like, why are you doing a golf tournament? Like, well, we've been doing a golf tournament for 87 years. That's why we do a golf tournament. You're like, well, your golf tournament, you spend 6 months out of the year where your entire staff is working full time to put on a golf tournament instead of pursuing the mission of the organization, and you net out $40,000. I mean, is that a really good use of the time? Well, Bob likes the golf tournament, so we do the golf tournament, right? So I'm a huge believer that organizations should talk a lot about strategic abandonment. It should always be part of the conversation. Now, strategic abandonment, not neglectful abandonment, right? The other thing that nonprofits and government are pretty good about doing is letting stuff die on the vine, right? Due to lack of resources or attention or creativity or thinking. So make sure that your collaboratives is even more important, right? Because you don't want to be dragging collaboratives along. That will sap the resources of all of the member organizations, and also it could have worse sort of reverberating impacts on the larger mission and purpose that the collaborative was formed to address. And this is a huge one for me. I have said it. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. I am not interested in working on collective impact with any of you people unless you also want to work on collective fundraising and collective revenue, right? This has got to be a shared responsibility. It's probably the thing I see doom collaboratives more than anything else, is that people get sideways around whose responsibility it is to ensure adequate financial resources for the collaborative to do its work and to continue. So very important that a conversation happen at the beginning of this. Okay, how are we all working together? How are we funding this thing? Are we all kicking in, right? Is it going to be an equal share, right? Who's going to be the lead agency? Are there going to be sub-awards? What are those sub-awards? How are we all messaging our fundraising? What is the case for support that we're all adhering to? You have to do this for your own organizations, even more so for your collaborative if you want the resources to continue. So, answering that, here are some of the things. I'm jumping off Art Taylor's work. If you came to that webinar, you heard Art talk a lot about building trust. That's the foundation, right? Now that building trust means that over time, you know, the lead organization is always transparent in terms of the financials, right? How things are moving, you know, that you are adhering to the terms of the partnership agreements that you've all agreed to. I was part of a collaborative back in the 90s. Again, I won't name names. I was part of a very important collaborative when the Marine Corps Air Station was being completely redone, right? And when before, hardly anybody remembers, some of you who weren't even born when they closed those bases. And a coalition was put together to negotiate collectively for property on the site and everything. One organization, without telling the other organizations, broke off and negotiated independently. It blew up the entire collaborative. And it ended up where we had less there than we could have gotten, right? So I've seen this happen, and that's the way, and I mean, to this day, I think there's some trust issues with those organizations. Develop a collective vision. We're going to talk about that in a second with strategic visioning. This is super important. Every member of the collaborative, especially the lead agency, should try to think about the mutual benefit of all of the other organizations, because this can blow up collaboratives too, right? If somebody's feeling like, hey, and I'll tell you, this happens a lot with boards I've seen. Again, I could tell you an example of a collaborative where the board is starting to bang on the executive director. Why are we a part of this? You're going to all these meetings. What are you doing? What do we get out of it, right? Now, that could be a selfish question, but it's also a relevant question, right? So instead of leaving that to chance, everybody should always be cognizant, especially the lead agency in a collaborative, of the mutual benefit of all of the members. We'll talk about this next, so we're not going to go over that now. Also, start small. We would encourage you in this process coming up here. This is a great time to seed a new collaborative, right? Don't bite off everything all at once. You can build out in concentric circles. You might start with the key partners, right, to pilot something, to get something going, right? And then you might build out from there. You may have a vision of what it needs to be eventually, but eat that elephant one bite at a time, right? So you can start getting your systems, your processes in place before you start making it larger and something that's more difficult to manage. Talked about this already. Establish clear expectations. Approach it strategically. This isn't like one-off, ad hoc. I'm collaborating now, right? That's more coalition or cooperation. Collaborative, you are approaching it strategically. If you want to create new value, you need to approach it strategically. And we're going to talk about that in the strategic visioning process a little more. This is a big one Art talks about too, that I love. And I love that the North Orange County Public Safety Collaborative has really seeded this, right? Consider non-traditional partners. Some of the best collaboratives I've seen are when somebody's gone, you know what? There's an arts organization. We're a homeless organization, but there's an arts organization that is doing this thing that would be of benefit to what we're doing, right? We've seeded collaboratives here between police departments and nonprofit organizations, right? So I want you to really think outside the box. Who can bring some value to help with the creation of new value to you that maybe isn't in your circle right now? I just went over I'm not going to beat that dead horse, but commit to collective fundraising. Build feedback loops. This has to be intentional. What is the communication process so everybody's always on the same page in the collaborative? And then if you've ever been to any of my workshops, you know I believe in micro-planning at the project level. In a lot of organizations, you do this, right? But then what I see happen is you get in a collaborative and that goes away. And so I've actually jumped in as a consultant to help collaboratives go, okay, you've got your vision, your big story of the future. You've got your measurable objectives, right? But what you don't have is an operating plan. You haven't project managed down at the project level. So you need to be, for collaboratives to really work, this becomes even more important because the more you ignore it, the more maybe you can get into mission drift and miscommunications and misalignments, right? So micro-planning at the project level collaboratives is very important. So this is something that's really important that we're going to ask for in the RFP, is if you're part of the collaborative, again, we're not going to fund coalitions. We're going to fund collaboratives. And we are strongly encouraging collaboratives. Sue and I were talking. We haven't yet established like you're going to get extra points or anything like that in the process, but we really want to see collaboratives more than we want to see individual organizations apply. If you're an individual organization, it doesn't exclude you from funding either. Just want to make that clear, but we really want to encourage collaboratives. So we want to see partnership agreements. So here are elements of good partnership agreements. There should be in a partnership agreement background, context, and history. Why? Because people leave, right? And if, I hate the hit by the bus, that's a morbid kind of analogy. I like the winning the lottery and you're a spinning chair in a puff of wind, right? And you're gone. You're on a beach in Barbados somewhere. Somebody's got to sit there and they have to be part of this now, right? So I always include, we want to see in your partnership agreement, why did you come together? What was the rationale? Well, we all met at this thing, or we went to this conference, or there was this new research that came out that indicated that these things were true. So we started this, we piloted a program. We'd like to know I think a partnership agreement needs to have that so anybody reading it can understand why this collaborative exists. The purpose and the type of collaborative effort, in your case, it's going to be a collaboration. So that's a little less important. Your SMART goals, specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, time-limited. What are the SMART goals? Now, this also is included in the impact evaluation, the outcomes measurement stuff that Laura will go over, but this should be part of the partnership agreement. Why? Because everybody should sign on to those, right? Every member of the collaborative should sign the partnership agreement agreeing that those are the goals and objectives. That's what we're all going to collectively measure. And clear roles and responsibilities. Who's the lead agency? Are there subawards going to others? Who is doing what as part of the collaborative, right? This group is providing this group is providing that group is providing this. And competitive guidelines. Remember we talked about competition hovering at the edge? I put in partnership agreements what we've all agreed to in terms of competition. It could be just a very simple clause that states that in these areas, this group agrees that we will not compete. We're not going to go in and compete with each other. Outside of those areas, we're all in competition, So we're going to all go compete for community development block grant money in the cities where we operate. That's just going to be competition. But when it comes to the North Orange County Public Safety Collaborative, when it comes to these things, these programs, these activities, we're not going to compete for funding for these. Oh, something happened with the slide here. This is about policies and procedures related to things like strategic abandonment, those types of things. Like what conditions would exist, or what is the process for deciding to end the collaborative? What is the process for deciding to add a new member to the collaborative? What is the process for deciding to boot a member from the collaborative? So that should be stated in the partnership agreement so everybody understands who's part of the collaborative, what those processes are when they come up. So you're not having to ad hoc it as it happens. You should have branding guidelines in so what are you calling the collaborative, right? Nobody calls it anything but what is in this partnership agreement, right? How do we talk about it? Who is authorized to talk to the press? Who is authorized to make statements on behalf of the collaborative? All of these types of things. What are the communication, marketing, and branding guidelines should be included in it? Timeline, key milestones, of course. I mean, that just goes along with planning. And your budget and joint revenue strategies. Again, collective impact should also include collective revenue, collective resource development, collective fundraising. So your partnership agreement should lay that out so that all the members understand what their responsibilities are. You might have a collaborative where the lead agency takes all that responsibility. Well, that should be laid out there. Then everybody knows, okay, I don't have to go raise money for this. But if you are relying on all the members of the collaborative to be part of generating the revenue and the financial resources, it needs to be stated in this, or I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to happen. And we want to see these signed. So we're going to ask in the RFP for these partnership agreements as part of your collaborative, and we want them signed, right? Now, the signature could be either the executive director, CEO, board chair, but it needs to be signed by leadership in your organization. So, incorporation into the RFP. So this section and the strategic visioning session I'm going to go over in a second are on pages 17 and 18 currently of the RFP. We may make tweaks to it before the ultimate bidders conference, but right now they're on page 17 and 18. So this is what we're looking for. First, we want you to identify all the collaborative partners, obviously. We want you to describe the specific roles and responsibilities. I will tell you that if you do a good job in your partnership agreements, you can just put in this section, see appendix, blah, the partnership agreements, right? We want you to describe the new value created. This, to me, is the most important part of this. This is the narrative part of that section of the RFP. We want to read those. That should be a rip-roaring read, in my opinion. I want to be able to read those, and I want goosebumps when I read those. This is why this group came together. Yes, I get it, right? So really put a lot of effort into this part of your proposal and attach the executed partnership agreements and describe the collaborative's decision-making process. So again, this is an area where if you've done a good job of putting that in your partnership agreements, you can just reference that in the grant that it is in the, we don't want to make you write these 2 times. But we want to know, I want to be able to read that and say, oh, okay, I don't think this group is going to have many problems. They've got a really good process for making decisions, for moving forward, for making changes. So that's what we're looking for on the collaborative side. So let me stop there and ask if there, before I move on to the strategic visioning portion of it, and ask if there are any questions from anybody. Yes. Hello, Catherine. Good. Hold on.
So what if you are just embarking on a brand new partnership, right? New collaborative, and you don't have all of these pieces quite put together yet?
Excellent question. Tell us that, right? But I would say you've got some time between now and when the RFP is due. I would get as far along as you can. But I think what we'd want to see, and Sue, I would look for your nodding on this, what we would want to see is that you've got a process into place and that you understand the new value that this collaborative is trying to create. Ultimately, that's the most important thing. As long as you have a process in place, I will say, though, that I would get some semblance of a partnership agreement signed and attached, right? Just because I think that will let us know, okay, these folks are serious about working together. No, but this isn't going to be something where we're going to allocate the funds and then everybody's going to decide, it's not a good idea, it didn't work, right? Any other questions? Yeah, I'll come back.
Hi, I'm with the Brea Education Foundation, and we've historically worked with Project Kinship as well as the Brea School District, so we have three distinct partners in the whole process. So my question is, you said two things that were kind of interesting. The new value created, is that, you want to see that in terms of like, this is baseline data, the new value improves the baseline data with respect to at-risk kids? Okay, so that was the first question. And the second thing is, with respect to partnership agreements, we have historically executed MOUs. Do you want to see an elaboration of that attached as an appendix, or?
MOU will work, right? As long as it contains those elements, right? That's what we're most concerned about, and it's signed, right? Indicating that everybody's on board and that they have read it. And then your first question, right on. Yeah, you nailed it. So, yeah.
Are there limits or guidelines for who can be your collaborative partner? So outside of a CVO, can you collaborate with a city, for example?
Yes. Absolutely. We'd love to see that. That's in the spirit of kind of non-traditional partnerships and creative types of partnerships.
If you are collaborating with multiple partners, is there more value in creating one big collaboration, or can we partner with multiple organizations?
I don't know if I completely understand. Do you mean be involved in multiple collaboratives? Yeah.
So if we're working with multiple agencies to work together to offer a program, but they don't necessarily are doing anything with each other, should we try to all meet together in one big collaborative to discuss that, or can we just partner individually with multiple agencies?
Both are fine, right? I think it's whatever makes sense for whatever new value you're trying to create, right? What makes the most sense? So if you've really gone through a process and you've thought about it and you want to formalize that more into collaborative because you think it will help you create more impact and be more impactful, more efficient, all those types of things, fine. But if you submit, I would say, Sue, if you submitted a proposal that offered a rationale, hey, we do this program, it's in a bit of a looser partnership, and even collaboratives have partners that aren't members of the collaborative, right? They're other partners. But the formal collaborative, we want to see how that works. But I think we would still fund something that doesn't conform to that formal collaboration, as long as there's a rationale for it, and you've got a good logic model, good impact model, and it aligns with the priority areas.
Want to ease everyone's tension a little bit, or anxiety, and really it's call me or Tim beforehand and just talk about it. Some of you have already done that, and we've kind of given the green light. There's really that whole term, there's no real wrong turn. So talk to us, because I know you're in that realm right now, so you're not going to make the wrong turn.
Yeah. Yes?
Just a quick question. What if you want to collaborate with somebody outside of Orange County? Is that okay?
I would defer to my colleague Sue on that. Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah, so if you want to collaborate with someone outside of Orange County, I think certainly we'd probably be open to it if we really felt like it was bringing value to the region that we're funding and to the issues that we're addressing. I saw another head. I'll get my steps in today.
Two questions. The first one is, will the RFP include a sample partnership agreement that includes all these elements that you want to see?
Yeah, and actually I was thinking about that.
Yes, then, yes.
Awesome.
We just decided that it will. It's a great idea.
And my second question does have to do with the funding. So obviously with collaboratives, if we're talking about sub-awards, it's helpful to know if there's a ceiling for a collaborative proposal in terms of award amount. Are you guys going to define?
So you've seen the RFP, and in each city, there is a ceiling. So you have to think about that. If you ask for 300,000 for one city, obviously you're not going to get it because the ceiling is 272. But there's also the regional portion of it, so you could do that.
Any other questions before we move on? And again, as Sue said, call us. Okay, we really tried to think about the RFP process differently than other RFP processes, where, it's just like, hey, you're out because you made this small error. We're not going to do that, right? We love you guys. You do great work up here, right? We've worked with you in this collaborative for 4 years, right? And so we want a continuation of the work, but we want to take it up a notch, so we want to help you do that, right? So I don't want anybody to feel like, oh my God, I have to get this exactly right. Let us know where you're struggling with this, and we'll help you through it, okay? All right, let's move on to the next part of this. Another section we're going to include in the RFP has to do with strategic visioning, this engagement-based planning process, engagement-based adaptive planning process that we did a workshop on. Now, again, I will encourage you, you can go on the website, you can watch the original workshop, and there are sample documents on there of all the things I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to go fairly quickly through a little refresher to help just kind of refresh some of you and introduce some of you so that when you go back and watch it, you'll understand what some of these concepts are and what we're looking for. So, anybody who knows me knows that I am not a big fan of the outdated, outmoded, old style of the nonprofit strategic plan. I think it's ridiculously outdated in that the time of walling off like 10-year goals, static 10-year goals with clear, incremental, predictable steps to get there, the world doesn't work like that anymore, right? We need a different style of planning for our organizations. We also can't just graft on, sometimes the business guys on our board will be like, you gotta get a business plan. You can't just graft on business planning processes from the for-profit world into the nonprofit world. They're distinct for a lot of reasons that I'm going to talk about in a second. Some of the problems with the old way of doing strategic planning is that the old way prioritizes the product over process. Here's what I mean by that. How many times have you heard the term, you got to write a strategic plan? I can go write you a strategic plan. I don't even need to know a whole lot about your organization. I can read your website, I could go and I could write something. It's not going to be relevant, not going to be actionable, you're not going to be able to operationalize it, it's not going to lead to any impact, but I could do it. And that's kind of the approach that we used to take. You got to just get a strategic plan written, right? I'm a huge believer that the people in the process are more important than the product, right? That old style is product fixated on writing a plan. What we need is a process that involves the right people so there's a sense of ownership that gets built in whatever the product ends up being, right? And that product that is eventually created is adaptable as it moves forward through the time frame of the planning period. We also are dealing with a world where we have data and inputs coming out of our ears. It's like way too much, right, to think that we can just wall off that set of measurable goals and objectives and it's going to be exactly like that in 5 years, and if we don't reach it, we failed. Instead, let's give ourselves a break a little bit and understand that the world has changed and adapt to a more adaptive planning model. Unrealistic predictability, and this is a huge one. It ignores community engagement. This is one of my biggest pet peeves with the old style of writing a strategic plan. There's no you don't use it as an opportunity to go out and engage the community. And what better opportunity to engage your donors, your supporters, your volunteers, your collaborative partners, your elected officials, your others, than when you're planning the story of the future of the great work you're doing, right? I mean, that's when the magic can happen. Every organization needs to be able to tell a story of the past, a story of the present, and a story of the future, right? Story of the past. Before us, the children of Guatemala had no water. Just it's a sob story. They didn't have it. Now, though, the children of Guatemala, they have this and that, the story of the present, right? But the magic happens between the story of the present and the story of the future. That's where people can engage. If you think this is great what we're doing now, you ain't seen nothing yet. Here's where we're going, right? You want to be part of that whole thing. So, that in community engagement is what happens in that space between the story of the present and story of the future. If you ignore it, you've missed a huge opportunity. It's an opportunity to do no-ask fundraising. Take your leadership vision out. I'm not asking you for money. I'm asking you, are you on board with this, right? Or are we thinking about this the right way? So the old style doesn't really do that. I believe in community engaged planning, and I'm going to show you how to do it in just a second. And also the old way of planning doesn't provide any alignment for action, right? So in my mind, when you establish a leadership vision, that story of the future for your organization, it should serve two purposes for you. One is as a magnet, right? It should draw people in. It should be that dynamic, right? People should read it and go, I want to be part of that. But it should be a place for you to align measurable objectives, strategies, tactics very clearly, right? So that everything that the organization is measuring, everything the organization is doing is aligned with the direction the organization is going. And I want to see, I read so many like vision statements and strategic plans and that kind of thing. Man, I want to see some passion in there. We do this work out of a sense of passion and mission, right? Our strategic planning should reflect that. This shouldn't be a knee walk through broken glass to do this. This should be a joyful exercise that engages the community, right? It's about our story of the future. So it should be imbued with the passion that we bring to the work. So this is another problem that I have on the other side of this that I've heard a lot. And I wish people would stop saying this, right? I hear people go, hey, we have a strategic plan. It's called doing things. Yeah, no you don't, and you're not. I mean, I know it's a pithy kind of thing to say, hey, we're so busy all the time, we don't need to do any kind of plan. If you're doing the right kind of planning, it makes this completely irrelevant, in my opinion, right? Also, we run organizations that have a nonprofit status. The government has bestowed that upon us, right? We have donors who give us their money to do this kind of work. There's a stewardship aspect to the organizations that we operate, and I believe that we owe it to those folks to plan our work, right? To engage in some kind of planning. So, a more effective way, strategic visioning. Here's my definition of strategic visioning. Collaboratively declaring measurable intent and inviting others to join you on an emergent journey. That's what I love, right? So we're going to tell people that's where we're going. That's our moonshot. Come on and join. Help us get there, right? This is where we're going. Now, we got to jump back to the beginning. We got to figure out, here are the places we think to start, right? But along the way, we're going to be able to adapt. We're going to put in systems and processes to change as the environment changes, as new opportunities arise, new challenges arise. But we're going to declare measurable intent, right? So that intent isn't just going to be some flowery statement at the end. It's something that we have decided that we can measure, and we know how we're going to measure it. And Laura's going to show you how to do that in the next bidders workshop. And I always like to point out that some organizations go, well, we're so small, we can't do this. When I kind of designed this process, I designed it specifically so that it would work for resource-constrained organizations. You can do this whether you are a small shop. Letty's done aspects of it, and she's not, Lot 318 is not a massive, huge organization, right? But they took the principles of it, and they've applied it to great effect, right? I've worked with organizations as large as Goodwill and United Way and others with this same kind of a process, right? So the principles are applicable and it's scalable to larger efforts, including, and very importantly, collaboratives, right? The principles should and can be incorporated into collaborative planning. So, I'm going to go through this very quickly because you can watch this in the workshop. But these are the elements of the strategic visioning process to help get you started. And this is the kind of stuff that you can let us know in the application if you'd like help with, right? The collaborative does keep some funds available so that they can allocate my time to help certain organizations do this. Now, I can't help everybody, but we try to do as much as we possibly can, during the grant period. So these are the types of things that I can help facilitate, those types of things, or if you go back and you feel like you can do it yourself, you can facilitate these things yourself. The first step in the strategic visioning process, and some of you are familiar with SWOT analysis. I have a little bit of a twist on SWOT analysis. I don't like it. I think that's a little bit of an outdated process as well. I found that when I used to do SWOT analysis, I'd end up in these ridiculously unhelpful conversations about what's the difference between a strength and an opportunity. And who cares, right? What I found is it all broke down into two categories: assets and liability. What do I got working for me? What do I got working against me? How can I quickly understand this, and how can I achieve consensus with the people who care about this, my board and my staff, about what organizational assets we have right now and what organizational liabilities outside of just financial. Financial is part of it, but what are the liabilities facing us, right? So I do a process called the Assets and Liabilities Inventory. The purpose is, and this, I like to try and make things as simple as possible, right? Good planning is about minimizing or eliminating your liabilities, maximizing your assets, right? So in order to do that, we need to know what they are. So the Assets and Liabilities Inventory, I call a family discussion, okay? Cone of silence. This is not for people outside your organization or your collaborative. You should do this as part of your collaborative as well. It's a frank, honest discussion about the condition of every part of your organization with the people who care about it and who have authority over it and have responsibility for it. It's a way to collaboratively generate a priority set of assets and liabilities to serve in your planning, and it involves all mission-critical people, gets them on the same page about what's working, what's not, and what must be addressed to succeed. So who should participate in your assets and liabilities inventory at the beginning of your strategic visioning process? So I'm going to do two things. If you're an individual organization, it should be your board, your entire board. And I always stress, try to get your whole board there, because you don't want that one straggler or two stragglers where everybody else is kind of gone. You want to pick a date where you get everybody there. I've done these during the pandemic via Zoom. Not as effective, I will tell you. It's a challenge facilitating on Zoom, but it's also a challenge facilitating in the room when people have masks on, I will tell you, because body language and facial expressions. But I prefer to have everybody in the same room as we're getting back to normal to do this type of process. I want people looking at each other across the table. I want people, the energy of people in the room, talking about in depth what the organization has working for it, what it has working against it. So, in terms of your organization, sometimes if you're a larger organization, I've done these where we've done one with the board. At Pathways of Hope, we did one with the board, and we did one with the staff. What was great about that process is you get to see sort of the board's perspective and the staff's perspective. It's not always the same thing. And then you can bring maybe a group together to sort of look at the results and kind of come up with, right? So there are different ways to slice and dice this, but you want to keep it to a family discussion. This is not a time to involve donors. It's not a time to involve people who don't really understand the organization and frankly who might use this information against you for some reason, because you need to be honest in this discussion. And always when you do this, I always start with a current conditions report, get everybody on the same page, but you can watch the workshop and kind of get the details and all that. And then what you end up with, these are the group norms that I established. I'm not going to go over these in detail. But in the assets and liabilities inventory, everything is on the table. Literally, when I facilitate these, I have a list of these types of things. And if I see an organization's not kind of addressing them, I'll poke it as the facilitator. I've noticed we haven't talked about revenue or fundraising yet. Let's pull that thread a little bit. Yeah, let's get down deep into it, right? And so you get everybody talking about these things, and you just wallpaper the wall. I literally put chart paper on the wall, line down the middle, assets, liabilities. We just go down. We start talking about what they are. And then we do a little process in the room where I set the assets aside, take the liabilities, and we all do a little group process where I say, these liabilities we're talking about, things working against us. Do you consider them an electric eel, a piranha, or a starving great white shark, right? Now, here's the interesting thing about that part of the process. Some people come to that meeting and they're like, finally, I'm gonna get to have my say on my thing. And they think it's a great white shark, their thing. And then they see it up with like the million other things you put up on the wall, and they're going, it's not much of a great white shark. Compared to that thing that person brought up, I didn't even think about that, right? So you walk out of there with a really clear sense of what the major things pushing on the organization are. And what that gives you is a master list of assets and liabilities that you develop collaboratively with the people who have responsibility and authority over the organization. And you break this down into a summary. What I try to shoot for is a summary of the assets and liabilities inventory that articulates the top 5, no more than 5, assets the organization has, that if we figure out a way to maximize these assets, we're off to the races. And the top no more than 5 liabilities, if we don't do something about these in the planning period, then we're sunk, right? Those are usually the starving great whites that you've identified, right? And I use that as a touchstone through my planning, going back to maximizing your assets, minimizing. Always through the planning process, we are asking ourselves, have we addressed this? I don't know that we've adequately addressed this massive great white liability that we identified. We got more work to do in the planning process. So that's get started, right? Now you kind of understand the conditions. But what do you do with all those assets that you identified, right? That's the fun part. These are the things we can leverage and we have working for us, right? This is where your visioning process starts, where the strategic visioning starts. Pull out those assets and start thinking about your story of the future. What can you make come true? And the way I like to do that is another collaborative process. As you've noticed, right, nobody yet has sat in a dark room to tap out the strategic plan all by themselves, right? This has all been done in dialogue with people. So I pulled together some of the same people from the assets and liabilities inventory. This one I might kind of expand out a little bit. There may be an opportunity for donors to be part of this. There may be an opportunity for volunteers to be part of this, collaborative partners to be part of this. For collaboratives, all the collaborative partners should be part of this process. It's a process I call a miracle happens, right? And essentially the way it works is you gather your people and you posit to them. You ask them a few questions. You ask them to connect to all the reasons why they got involved in this. And then thinking about that, you ask them, okay, I want you to imagine that overnight tonight, a miracle happens. You go to bed tonight, you wake up tomorrow, you are magically transported 3 years into the future. Every hope, dream, aspiration you had for this has magically come true. All I want you to do now is tell me what it looks like, right? And then I establish some group norms for this session. Very important, no budgeting at this stage. You're gonna budget later in your strategic planning process, not now. As nonprofits, we are conditioned to order off the right side of the menu where the prices are, right? I'll have whatever the $9.99 appetizer is. I don't care if I'm allergic to it or not. That's what I'm getting. That's the price, right? This is one of the only times when we get to do this, so do it. So as a group norm, when I'm facilitating, no budgeting. That doesn't just mean money. It means people, it means time, it means facilities, all those types of things. I want everything on the table at this point. But we're going to keep it realistic because we're going to establish a time limit, right? So whatever is realistic in terms of our highest aspirations within 3 years or 5 years. I just did one the other day. It was a 5-year one, right? And so we constantly use that as a touchstone. People kind of check themselves. Hey, I want to do, is that possible within? Well, what is possible? Moving toward that big thing that you'd like to see. Maybe it's not possible to complete in 3 years, but you can get on the road to get to making it happen, right? No judgment, very important. You're not judging other people's ideas. Most importantly, you're not judging your own ideas, which this is the next group norm I love, Babylon, I always tell people. During this process, we're conditioned again to kind of get everything set in our head so that we don't look stupid. And like, okay, now I'm going to say it. Here's the great articulated thing I just thought of, right? I tell people, I don't care, mumble away. Like really, I want you to babble at me. There's something magical about people feeling free in that kind of environment to work off each other's ideas and to tell you, you know what, I don't know exactly how to say this, but I want our organization to feel like home to people when they come in. That's important stuff as you're trying to build a culture of your organization. You're trying to establish your story of the future. So encourage people to really think out loud and to build off the ideas of other people. And then I always say, start anywhere, go anywhere. The brain is a miraculous thing. It makes weird connections. I've done these, right, and somebody's gone on for, 5 minutes about the financials, right? And for some reason, that sparked something in somebody over there about, a program-related activity. That's fine. You want to facilitate and you want to make sure you pull threads completely, but let this kind of bounce around. You'll really get a sense of what's in the hearts and heads of the people that you're working with. And so you end up with, at the end of it, your leadership vision, what I call your leadership vision. This is your story of the future. This is where words really matter. Assets and liabilities inventory, that summary, that is not a public-facing document. Nobody ever sees it. And again, you'll see a sample of it if you go on the website. There's a sample of that, and there's a sample of a leadership vision on there as well. But the leadership vision, words really matter. I wordsmith these. We really want to make sure they're as powerful as they possibly can be, that they are conveying the new value that your collaborative is creating, if you're doing this as part of a collaborative, right? They should inspire, they should guide, they should set expectations. It should motivate continuous focused activity. And the way you get there is All the things you just did in the assets and liabilities inventory and in the visioning session have provided for you the raw materials to draft your leadership vision. Again, go on the website, look at the sample, you'll see. I don't like paragraph-long vision statements. Vision statements mean nothing to me. They're usually a bunch of weasel words that are kind of taught. We will be a catalyst for achieving change. You know, it's like, I want to know exactly. Stick a flag in the ground. Tell me, these are the 4 planks of our leadership vision, right? This, and this, and it should be powerful. Now, we talked about community engaged planning, right? This is the point at which in the strategic visioning process where you throw in that broad community engagement. You now have a draft leadership vision. You have a story of the future, right, that is in draft form. Put draft on it in big letters at the top, and then go out and put a community engagement strategy together. Take some time to do this in your planning process. So if you're collaborative, what I would suggest that you do, back to your question, Catherine, if you're sort of at the beginning of the process, let us know that in the RFP, that you want to follow these principles, right, but you may not be there yet. You may not have gone through this whole process yet. Let us know that. Right? But this is a process that's very important. You want to make a list of people. I usually use 3 categories of people for my community engagement planning during my strategic visioning process. The first is absolutely, positively must meet with face-to-face, one-on-one. They are that important. I want to sit with my major donors. I want to sit with my major partners. I want to slide that thing across the table and go, what do you think about that? It's in draft form right now. Are we thinking too big? Are we thinking too small? Are we going in the right direction? What have we not considered? What would you do differently, right? And get their perspective on it one-on-one. The second group are groups that you can go and present to. Perhaps you're very tied in with the Rotary Club in your area, or I know I chair the Continuum Care Board for the county. We, the Family Solutions Collaborative, I helped them with their planning process. They came and presented at the Continuum Care Board. Why? Because we fund them, right? And so they presented their draft leadership vision, got some feedback from the Continuum Care Board because it was an important group. And then the third is folks you can share the information with more in an email form, something like that, to gather information. But this is your opportunity, before you've written it in stone, to start building some community support and some enthusiasm for your story of the future. You'll also get back some really, really good ideas. And then, so now you've done your assets and liabilities inventory, you've got your visioning, you've got your leadership vision set, right? You've engaged your community engagement process. The next part is you need strategies and tactics, right? Again, instead of just going and, all right, let's go assign Christina to go do some strategy and tactics. She's good at that, right? So take what we've done there. We've developed some SMART objectives related to all our the planks of our leadership vision, right? There's a community engaged process that you can use here. We call it the big idea meeting, right? Where the problem with brainstorming, though, is that we don't teach people how to do it. So there's a process that I love doing that is very collaborative, that is fun for people to participate in. And I encourage you, if you're putting your collaborative together, to use this process when you're trying to do some ideation and creation. I encourage you in your organizations to use this process. And again, you can go deeper into it on the website. But in essence, this is how we typically do brainstorming. Somebody comes up with an idea, and one of 2 things happens, right? You get a group of people together. Here's our vision. We want to create some strategies and tactics around it. Let's brainstorm. Go out in your breakout groups. Somebody tosses an idea out, and one thing that can happen is everybody goes, yeah, that's a great idea, right? So you achieve consensus. Yeah, great. We're done. Problem with that is that you've not improved the idea, right? It might have been consensus, but is it the best part of the idea? Nobody's challenged it, nothing. It may be the highest iteration that you can think of that idea, but I don't think that's adequate. The other problem that we get into, somebody tosses out an idea, and it gets criticized, right? You ever been in a brainstorming, somebody does that, and the criticism comes in the way of like the resident historian, we tried that once, it didn't work, something like that. And then what happens is that gets dragged into the pit of despair, right? And then the person who tossed that out, they're done. They're not saying anything, they're not opening their mouth ever again, they're done with the brainstorming. There's a different way to do it. And it's based on improv. Anybody ever watch Whose Line Is It Anyway, or gone to Groundlings Theater, or Upright Citizens Brigade, or some of those great, seen Will Ferrell or Amy Poehler, like real high-level improv people. They use a very simple process called yes and. My son's a theater geek from USC. Yes and, he's a great improviser. Yes and, right? Yes and means if Will Ferrell and Amy Poehler are on stage together, right, and Amy Poehler's on stage, Will Ferrell walks up and says, "Good morning, Miss Frog." Amy Poehler doesn't go, I'm not a frog, right? I have my own idea in my head. Amy Poehler goes, yes, okay, I'm a frog. Oh, life's tough since I lost my legs, right? Now we have a legless frog and Will Ferrell and Amy Poehler. There's endless opportunities, right, for that. We want to employ the same thing. So every idea, bring your people together, put them through this process, right? Every idea is a first starting point, but that's going to lead us to the probable, right? We could probably do it. If somebody thought of it right off the bat, probably somebody else has done it. But then we want to go, yes, and what's possible with that? And then all the way up, we want to keep yes-ending that idea all the way to the pipe dream. What's the highest iteration we can possibly think of for that idea? This is a way to do community engagement around your strategic planning and involve people actually in generating strategies and tactics. Now, you're going to end up with a lot of ideas when you do this process. So what do you do after that to kind of narrow it down to things that actually align with your leadership vision and the measurable objectives you set? Well, I do a very scientific process, take everything that came up from the creative pull process, and I have 3 categories that I put it into, very scientific. The first, I won't go over these. The first is, no, we're not doing that. It's a stupid idea. You're going to get a lot of these when you do creative pull. You should get a lot of really horrible ideas, right? So your first cut is to go, yeah, that's not feasible, that's illegal, we're not going to do that one, right? Just you whip them out, they're done, right? But the next one are the opposite of those. They're like, why haven't we been doing that all along? You get a bunch of those when you pull the right people together and you get them really thinking as part of that creative pull process. But the last group are the fun ones. Right? You get a bunch of these ideas where you're like, wow, that's interesting. My best example is when I ran the Irvine Public Schools Foundation. We did the big idea meeting as part of our planning process one time. A PTA mom, during one of our yes-ending sessions in a breakout about revenue, it started with, hey, why don't we raffle off, do a raffle. Schools do raffles all the time, right? So that's a probable idea. They yes-ended it up to, well, I know somebody from Harley-Davidson, maybe we raffle off a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Oh, okay, we're yes-ending things. PTA mom was like, all right, if we want to go pipe dream, how about this? We get a lot of support from developers here in Irvine. Why don't we get one of them to give us a house, we'll raffle it off. Okay, that's a yes, but idea. Yeah, can we do that? Can we actually? Yeah, we did it. We raised $2 million. We raffled off a house. We did it multiple years there, so, and it became a model that the Ocean Institute now does, and that's they do in Santa Barbara at the Art Center, but we did that first at the Irvine Public Schools Foundation. Now, not every idea is going to be world-beating like that, but you're not going to get that idea unless you subject it to some kind of process. So, I would ask you, does that sound like a better strategic planning process than I'm going to hire a consultant, they're going to sit in a room, they're going to tap out right? This is something everybody will feel a sense of ownership at the end. So how do we want to see this in the RFP? So this is the last part. So the first is, we want you to describe your organization's planning process. Remember, you don't have to tell us, you don't have to try and stuff it in. If you're not doing the process I just described, that's okay. Not everybody is, right? Let us know. You may have a planning process that isn't what I described that works for your organization. That's okay too. We just want to know what your organization's current planning process is. Now, for collaboratives, we also want to know what planning process you're going to employ. So depending on whether you're applying as an individual organization or as a collaborative, we want to know what the planning process is going to be. We want clear organizational goals and objectives, right? So if you have that clear story, what is your organization measuring? Overall. Now, programmatically, obviously the program that you're proposing, Laura's going to go over all that stuff, your impact model, outcomes measurement, but we'd like to know organizationally and for the collaborative, what are the big organizational goals and objectives that you are measuring? And then, as I mentioned, how are these strategic visioning principles, how are they or will they be incorporated into your collaborative? To your point, Catherine, again, if you're not doing it, let us know. Okay, well, we're going to start doing this. And as the first part of the funding period, this is a process we're going to go through. We want to see a collaborative leadership vision in it, if you have it already. And if you have a current strategic plan, right, you might have just completed one. And you're not going to go through another process. We'd like to see that as well. If you're part of an existing collaborative that is proposing and you have a strategic plan, we want to see that and we'd like you to attach it. An executive summary is fine. It doesn't have to be the full-on huge thing. And lastly, again, I keep stressing this because I want you all to understand. I don't want anybody leaving here thinking like, oh, we don't do that, so we can't apply. Apply. Let us know. You don't have a plan? What are your challenges? There's a question in there specifically asking you what challenges, what barriers has your organization or your collaborative hit in trying to engage in solid planning. And please request assistance during the funding period. All right. Any questions on that, or even going back to the previous one? So hold on, Sue has a comment.
I just want to make sure that people understand, and I'm sure Tim went over this, but just be honest. Let us know all of your pimples and gray spots and so forth, because we want to see that. It works towards points. Gaining points. And then the other thing is that that last slide, if we could turn to that last slide, it's this is not relevant to just this funding. I really think that this is going to be important to you to any funding, really.
Yeah, so any questions? Yes, Catherine.
If you have your leadership planks already written out, do you consider that, as you look at it, you're saying, okay, this person, they've gone through this process, they get it? Okay.
Yeah, and I know you have. We work together on it. I know some of you have, and some of you were part of the strategic visioning peer learning group, and so some of you have done that. Some of you may have taken the last workshop. I know I did hear from some of you who said after the last workshop you actually did some of this kind of stuff. So yeah, we'd like to hear the extent to which you have done it, if you're starting to do it, or if you have another planning process that works for you. We're not trying to tell you have to do this, right? Let us know what's working for you as well. We just want to know that you're planning the work. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. And we're really looking forward. Please come to the next one. That's Laura is going to talk about the section on outcome measurements and impact model and impact evaluation. So she's going to cover some of the ways that you can put a measurement regimen around some of the stuff that we talked about here. So with that, any last comments? Sue?
And just, and I saw people taking, feverishly notes. This is recorded, and we're going to post this on our website, so the slides will be posted as well. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right.